I had exactly $412.63 in my checking account, a healing incision under my ribs from emergency surgery, and a padded envelope with no return address sitting on my apartment floor when I got home from the pharmacy. 3 days earlier, my older brother had told our family that our mother's $640,000 legacy fund was already spoken for, that the lake house would need to be sold, and that I should focus on getting better instead of asking complicated questions. I remember standing there with the envelope in one hand and my pain medication in the other, thinking I should sit down before I opened it. I didn't. Inside was a black USB drive and one line typed on plain printer paper: check the metadata before he destroys the rest. At the bottom, someone had written a probate case number in blue ink. I put the phone face down. Then I waited. Because by that point, I knew one thing for certain. If my brother was nervous enough to hide behind a mailbox and a USB drive, there was something in our mother's estate worth stealing back through the courts. Let me take you back. My name is Elena Voss. I was 34, a contracts manager for a hospital network in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the kind of person who color-coded receipts even when nobody asked me to. My flaw, and I know it now, was that I mistook patience for protection. I thought if I stayed calm long enough, other people would eventually act right. They usually don't. The call from the surgeon came on a Tuesday in April, 2 hours before my younger cousin texted, "Your mom's asking for you." I was still sore, still moving carefully, still sleeping in a recliner because lying flat hurt. My mother, Ruth Voss, had late-stage heart failure and the kind of pride that made her apologize for needing help. She died that Friday at 6:18 p.m. I got there 12 minutes too late. My brother Graham was already in the room. So was his wife, Dana. Graham had one hand on the bed rail and the other on our mother's phone. At the funeral, he played the grieving son perfectly. Dark suit, quiet voice, measured tears. People love a man who seems restrained in public. It looks like dignity. Sometimes it's just rehearsal. The service was held at St. Andrew's in Charlotte, the church where our parents had renewed their vows on their 30th anniversary. After the burial, everyone gathered in the fellowship hall for sandwiches and coffee. I was standing near the kitchen doorway when Graham leaned toward me and said, softly enough that no one else would hear, "Mom, you weren't built for this stuff. I'll handle the estate. You should just rest." That was history scar number one. Graham had always been the golden child because he looked like our father and knew how to perform confidence. I was the reliable one. Which sounds flattering until you realize reliable children are the ones families hand the unpleasant truth to after the damage is done. History scar number two happened 7 years earlier when our father was in rehab after a stroke. I had taken unpaid leave to manage his insurance appeals. Graham visited once, brought flowers, and left before the neurologist came in. On the drive home, he said, "You're good at cleanup, Elena. That's your lane." He smiled when he said it. Calm cruelty is always worse than shouting. Shouting looks messy. Calm cruelty looks believable. Our mother knew the difference. 2 months before she died, she asked me to meet her at the lake house in Davidson. It was a cedar-sided place on a narrow inlet of Lake Norman, bought in 1992 for $148,000 and recently appraised at $1.1 million. My parents had planned to retire there full-time. Life had other ideas. She was sitting at the breakfast table with a manila folder and her reading glasses hanging on a chain around her neck. "Your brother thinks money is structure," she said. "Your father thought promises were structure." They were both wrong. Inside the folder were copies of trust documents, account summaries, and a letter from her attorney, Malcolm Reed. The trust held the lake house, $640,000 in investment accounts, and a small scholarship fund she wanted created in my father's name for first-generation nursing students. She told me Graham was to receive a limited distribution over 10 years. I was named successor trustee, not because she loved me more, because, in her words, "You finish what you start." She made me promise not to discuss it unless she told me to. I kept that promise longer than I should have. After the funeral, Graham told everyone the opposite. He said Mom had simplified things at the end. He said the scholarship fund was unrealistic. He said the market was volatile. He said the lake house required centralized control. He said a lot of things in a voice people trust. 3 days later, Malcolm Reed's office called. His paralegal sounded strained. Mr. Reed had a medical emergency. He's out indefinitely. There's a board presentation regarding the nursing scholarship next Thursday at the Winstead Arts Gala. Your brother requested all materials. We assumed you were copied. I wasn't. There was a pause. Then she lowered her voice. Ms. Voss, the board vote includes approval of liquidating trust-held real property to seed a donor-advised fund under new management. If you miss this, you lose everything. That was the clock. Not just the money. The house. The scholarship. The proof of what our mother actually wanted. Graham had set the vote inside a public event because public rooms make private theft look official. I drove to Malcolm Reed's office the next morning with a pillow pressed against my side the whole way. The building was in South End, glass and brick, and very pleased with itself. Graham was already there when I arrived. He came out of the elevator with Dana and a banker I recognized from Truist. He smiled like we were headed to brunch. Alina, he said, you shouldn't be driving. I'm here for the file. There is no file, he said. Malcolm's out. Everything's in transition, and Mom didn't want you stressed. Dana added, the gala will be hard on you physically. That was when I knew they needed me absent, not merely uninformed. I asked the receptionist whether any transfer documents had been recorded after our mother's death. Graham answered for her. You don't understand the mechanics. I said, then explain them. He didn't. He put his palm lightly on my elbow, staring me toward the door with the kind of touch that reads polite unless you're the one being moved. Go home, Elena. I've got it. I went home. Then I opened the envelope. The USB drive contained 4 files. One was a PDF of a beneficiary deed transferring the lake house to Graham individually, signed 2 weeks before our mother died. One was a scanned affidavit claiming she intended the scholarship fund to be advisory only. One was a grainy lobby security clip showing Graham entering Malcolm Reed's office on a Saturday. The last file was a spreadsheet export with revision history. At first glance, the deed looked clean. Notarized. Witnessed. Recorded. I felt my stomach drop. Then I noticed the file properties. The PDF had been created at 2:14 a.m. the day after our mother died. The notary block listed a commission expiration date that, according to the document, had already passed. The scan file name included final_use_this_1. The witness signature on the affidavit belonged to a woman who had retired from Reed's office 8 months earlier. The metadata didn't just raise questions. It gave me sequence. I called the number listed for Malcolm Reed's firm and asked for whomever was covering fiduciary matters. The woman who answered introduced herself as Simone Hart, interim counsel. 46. Precise voice. No wasted syllables. I said, I think my brother forged a beneficiary deed and is trying to liquidate a trust at a donor gala. She was quiet for 2 beats. Then she said, bring everything. And Ms. Voss? Don't email him. Don't warn him. People who forge title documents make mistakes when they feel safe. Simone's office had 2 legal pads, 1 untouched cup of coffee, and a wall calendar that was somehow still paper in the year 2026. I handed her the USB. She reviewed the files in silence. Then she asked, who else knows the trust names you as successor trustee? My mother. Malcolm. Possibly Graham, if he went through the house. She nodded. Your mother used a fraud carve-out. I must have looked blank because she turned the trust binder toward me and pointed to Article 9. This clause is beautiful, she said. Any beneficiary who attempts to obtain trust assets through fraud, coercion, concealment, or forged instruments is automatically reduced to $1 and permanently excluded from discretionary distributions. Your mother left him a narrow path. He tried to bulldoze around it. I stared at the page. The words were right there, sharp and clean, signed and notarized months before she died. Simone tapped the deed copy. If this forgery is real, he just triggered his own disinheritance. That was the second folder. Simone had pulled it from a fireproof cabinet after checking the trust inventory. Inside were original estate planning drafts, the title report, and a memo from Malcolm Reed documenting a private meeting with my mother. The memo mentioned her concern that Graham might convert grief into entitlement. The second folder changed everything. It changed the stakes because now this wasn't a family disagreement. It was a forged instrument, a fraudulent transfer attempt, and a breach of fiduciary duty wrapped in polished language. It changed the strategy because now we had contemporaneous notes, original signatures, and a clause designed for exactly this kind of person. And it changed me because for the first time since my mother died, I stopped hoping Graham would come to his senses. He already had. This was his sensible plan. Simone moved fast. She filed a petition for temporary injunctive relief in Mecklenburg County to block any sale or encumbrance of the lake house. She prepared an affidavit for me regarding the trust conversation with my mother and my role as successor trustee. She ordered a rush forensic document review on the deed. She also called the gala board chair, a woman named Evelyn Cross, and asked one question. Did you know tomorrow's donor presentation relies on property title that may be forged? When Evelyn said no, Simone replied, then you'll want me in the room before anyone votes. Meanwhile, Graham escalated. He called my cousin Nora and said I was medicated and confused. He told our aunt I'd become obsessed with technicalities. He texted me once, we both know Mom wanted me to lead. Don't embarrass yourself in public. I screenshotted it and sent it to Simone. She wrote back immediately, good. He's moved from concealment to intimidation. Judges notice pattern. The night before the gala, the anonymous sender revealed herself. She called from a blocked number at 9:12 p.m. My name is Tessa Bloom, she said. I worked for Malcolm Reed as an executive assistant until last fall. My pulse kicked. You sent the USB? Yes. Why? Because your brother offered me money to say I'd seen your mother sign a revised deed. I said no. 2 weeks later, someone accessed old office templates from a deactivated archive account that used to be mine. I didn't know how to prove it until the building manager let me review weekend access logs. She forwarded me a PDF within 30 seconds. It showed Graham's keycard entering the law office suite on a Saturday at 6:41 p.m., then the records room at 6:47. She also sent a voicemail file. In it, Dana's voice said, "We're not asking you to lie, Tessa. We're asking you to remember helpfully." That was the ally identity twist. The woman Graham assumed was disposable became the witness he never planned for. I slept maybe 90 minutes that night. The incision burned. My hands shook twice while buttoning my blouse. I almost stayed home around noon because pain does strange things to courage. It turns all plans into optional plans. I stood in my bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and said out loud, "This isn't revenge. This is justice." Then I got in the car. The Winstead Arts Gala was held in the atrium of a museum uptown, all glass walls and donor plaques and people speaking in soft, expensive tones. Graham loved rooms like that. They reward confidence before evidence. He was near the stage when I arrived, talking to Evelyn Cross and a private wealth advisor beside a display board titled Ruth Voss Nursing Legacy Initiative. My mother's name in serif font. My brother's hand on the easel. It made me cold. He saw me and smiled, but the smile slipped when he noticed Simone beside me and Tessa 10 feet behind us in a navy suit. Dana's expression changed first. Recognition travels faster through guilt. Graham walked over. "Elena, you look better." "I'm ambulatory," I said. "This really isn't the place." Simone stepped in. "Actually, it is. Since you scheduled a title-dependent liquidation vote in a public donor setting." He looked at her badge. "And you are counsel for the successor trustee." He laughed once softly. "There is no successor trustee issue. We have the deed." Simone handed him a thin envelope. "Temporary restraining papers. Asset preservation order. Petition filed 42 minutes ago." He didn't take it at first. That was the small reveal. The first crack. Around us, voices lowered. People in tuxedos are still people. They can smell collapse. Dana said, "This is unnecessary." Tessa answered from behind me. "So was using my archive credentials." Graham turned. Full stillness this time. "I have no idea who that is." Tessa said, "You offered me $15,000 to backdate my memory." That was the bigger reveal. Evelyn Cross stepped away from the easel. The banker took one careful step sideways. The way people do when they suddenly remember they have compliance departments. Graham recovered fast. He always did. This is a misunderstanding built on files taken out of context. My mother changed her mind. Malcolm knew that. Elena is upset and being manipulated. Then Simone asked the museum AV team for a screen. I hadn't known she'd do that. She'd warned me to expect a public set piece, but not the exact sequence. The projector came down over the stage. The room thinned into a hush. Simone plugged in a drive and displayed the deed metadata first: creation date, modification trail, software version, user ID linked to a home computer registered to Dana's Consulting LLC. Then the expired notary commission. Then the keycard logs. Then Dana's voicemail to Tessa. Small to bigger to nuclear. Dramatic irony does something strange in a room like that. Half the people had spent 20 minutes complimenting Graham's leadership before learning it might be built on a forged instrument. You could see them recalculating the last hour in real time. Graham tried one last move. Metadata can be manipulated. Simone nodded. Correct. Which is why we also subpoenaed the county recording package and the originating IP address used to upload the deed. It traces to your home network. Dana actually closed her eyes. Evelyn Cross said, very quietly, is this true? Nobody answered. That was answer enough. Then Malcolm Reed walked in. I hadn't known that either. Simone had. He'd been discharged from the hospital that afternoon against advice and arrived with a cane, pale, and annoyed to be upright. Malcolm was in his 60s, old school careful, and had the expression of a man who hated being made part of somebody else's mess. He took the microphone without asking. For clarity, he said, Ruth Voss never signed a transfer deed to Graham Voss individually. I drafted an irrevocable trust amendment naming Elena Voss successor trustee and establishing the nursing scholarship. Any document suggesting otherwise is false. That was nuclear. You could feel the room drop. No shouting. No scene. Just oxygen leaving people. Graham started to say something. Malcolm cut him off with one sentence. You came into my office on a Saturday using a key you were never authorized to have. The courtroom wasn't the first room that went silent. The gala was. Security didn't drag anyone out. Real life is quieter than that. The board canceled the vote. The banker left. Evelyn Cross requested all printed materials surrendered immediately. Dana sat down in a chair near the wall as if her niece had decided for her. Graham stood there holding the injunction papers he finally accepted, looking less angry than stunned. He had built his plan on motion. When motion stopped, so did he. The official consequence came 3 days later. Mecklenburg County Superior Court scheduled an emergency hearing on the injunction and title freeze. Graham arrived with counsel this time, a polished litigation partner who emphasized family misunderstanding in the first 3 minutes and never used the word fraud once. Simone used it 11 times. She introduced the trust, the fraud carve-out, the deed defects, the metadata chain, the office access logs, the witness affidavit from Tessa, and Malcolm Reed's declaration. Then she put me on the stand. I told the truth plainly. My mother's instructions. Graham's attempts to isolate information. The gala vote. The text messages. The pressure campaign. I kept my voice level. It helped that by then anger had matured into clarity. When the forensic document examiner testified that the deed package showed layered signature placement inconsistent with an original ink execution and that the uploaded file history predated the purported notary event, Graham's attorney stopped taking notes for a full 10 seconds. Then Dana was called under subpoena. She had been given every opportunity not to make it worse. Graham still thought she would hold the line. He didn't know she had met with separate counsel the day before. She answered questions in a flat voice, the voice of someone who has realized loyalty is not a defense. Yes, the document had been prepared on her laptop. Yes, Graham told her his mother would have wanted efficiency. Yes, she left the voicemail for Tessa. No, she never saw Ruth Voss sign any revised deed. The courtroom went silent. Judges rarely perform a motion. That's not their job. But Judge Miriam Hale took off her glasses, set them on the bench, and looked directly at my brother before saying, "This court is not dealing with a clerical dispute. This court is dealing with a deliberate attempt to divert trust assets through a fabricated instrument during a period of family bereavement. She entered a temporary injunction, froze any attempt to transfer, refinance, or encumber the lake house, suspended Graham from any claimed fiduciary role, and referred the deed matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential forgery and attempted obtaining property by false pretenses. She also approved Simone's request for exclusive control of trust communications to move through me as successor trustee. At the end, she added, Mr. Vasa's beneficial interest is subject to the fraud carve-out pending final determination, which was the court's clean way of saying he may have cheated himself down to $1. Outside the courthouse, Graham finally spoke directly to me without performance. You really wanted to destroy me over a house? I said no. You wanted to destroy our mother's last wishes over a house. I just brought the paperwork. Then I got in my car and went home. The district attorney did not move overnight. Real systems almost never do. But systems leave tracks. The forged deed was flagged with the County Register of Deeds. The title company placed an internal fraud alert on the parcel. The Gala Board issued a written statement suspending the scholarship launch pending judicial confirmation of the trust, then privately apologized to me for relying on Graham's representations. Malcolm Reed recovered enough to certify the original file inventory. Tessa gave a formal recorded statement. Dana filed for separation 6 weeks later and entered a cooperation agreement in a civil case. Graham, for the first time in his life, discovered that charm has a short shelf life when it meets subpoena power. The final hearing on trust administration happened in November. By then, the evidence stack had become almost boring in its completeness. Bank records showed Graham had already contacted a private lender about a bridge loan against expected sale proceeds. Emails showed he planned to restructure the scholarship visibility so the donor-facing initiative would be controlled by an LLC he formed 2 days after our mother died. There was your secret weapon in reverse, an LLC shell, documented too early, too greedily, too sloppily. Simone explained each term in court the way my mother would have appreciated. No drama, just consequence. The judge removed Graham permanently from any role relating to the estate or trust, enforced the fraud carve-out, reduced his interest to $1, approved my administration of the scholarship fund, and entered a protective order barring him from representing himself as acting for the trust or contacting board members, title officers, or financial institutions on its behalf. A separate civil settlement required him to pay attorney's fees from his own accounts. The criminal review remained open. Whether it resulted in charges was no longer my emotional center. The official record already said what mattered. The first time I went back to the lake house alone after all that, I stood on the back deck at dusk and listened to the water bump softly against the dock. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Mostly I felt tired. Justice is not cinematic when you're inside it. It is binders, affidavits, waiting rooms, stiff court clothes, coffee gone cold. It is choosing not to text back. It is surviving your own doubt long enough for facts to mature. 1 year later, the Ruth Foss Nursing Legacy Scholarship had awarded its first 3 recipients, a former CNA returning to school at 38, a community college transfer from Gastonia, and a veteran's daughter who cried when she read the award letter. The Gala Board invited me back, and I went, but only after making them remove all vanity branding and publish the trust language accurately. The lake house stayed in the trust exactly as my mother intended, preserved for limited family use and eventual charitable sale under conditions she wrote herself. Malcolm Reed retired. Simone Hart took over the practice. Tessa joined her firm full-time and became the kind of witness coordinator every bad actor should fear. As for Graham, he moved to a condo in Raleigh and stopped using our last name professionally for a while. People asked questions he couldn't answer cleanly. The injunctions and orders followed him in the kinds of searches that matter. He was not ruined in some dramatic way. Life is usually less theatrical and more precise than that. He just lost access to rooms he assumed would always open for him. That was enough. Karma doesn't need a spotlight. Sometimes it just needs a filing stamp. I healed, too, though not all at once. I stopped apologizing for being the one who checks the documents twice. I stopped treating my calm like a personality trait other people were entitled to use against me. I learned that boundaries are not cruelty, and that self worth gets clearer the moment you stop confusing family roles with permanent obligations. Some people call that hardening. I call it accuracy. Every now and then, someone asks whether I regret taking it public at the gala. I tell them no. Public deception deserves public correction, especially when it hides behind grief, philanthropy, and polished language. My mother spent her life teaching us that dignity is not a mood, it's a practice. In the end, protecting her wishes meant practicing it when it was least convenient. So that's my question for you. Have you ever had to become the calmest person in the room because someone else was counting on your silence? And if this story stayed with you, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.